Former President Trump wrapping up a news conference just a short time ago. We're keeping an eye on his movements from Trump Tower. He's expected to leave at any moment. Of course, we'll show you that when it happens. You're looking at the live shot now. Trump hammered home that if this can happen to me, the verdict, of course, it can happen to you, as he blasts the, quote, scam conviction against him. He focused on the key issues of his campaign: illegal immigration, inflation, the economy, all problems you care about. He even hit on foreign policy. And he vowed to appeal the verdict and make America great again.
This is a case where if they can do this to me, they can do this to anyone. It's very important, far beyond me. And this can't be allowed to happen to other presidents. It should never be allowed to happen in the future. But this is far beyond me. This is bigger than Trump. This is bigger than me. This is bigger than my presidency. When you look at our country, what's happening, where millions and millions of people are flowing in from all parts of the world, not just South America, from Africa, from Asia, from the Middle East. And they're coming in from jails and prisons. And they're coming in from mental institutions and insane asylums. They're coming in from all over the world into our country. And we have a president and a group of fascists that don't want to do anything about it, because they could right now, today, he could stop it. But he's not. They're destroying our country. So we will continue the fight. We're going to make America great again. Very simple. When people fight MAGA, they say, we're going to fight. I watch Biden. We're going to fight MAGA. We're going to stop MAGA. It's make America great again. That's all it is. MAGA. Make America great again. Our country's in serious trouble.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Kayleigh McEnany, here with my co-host Harris Faulkner and Emily Compagno. Also joining us, podcast host of Kennedy Saves the World, Kennedy herself, and Fox News contributor, George Washington University law professor and constitutional law expert, Jonathan Turley. You know, Professor Turley, we went through some of the substantive issues that Trump addressed, but he also spent a lot of time on the case. He gave what I would call his own version of his closing argument today in those hour-long remarks. What did you make of it?
Well, it wasn't a bad closing argument. The fact is that much of what happened in that courtroom became superfluous because of those instructions. Some of us were hoping for a hung jury because we hoped that the jury might redeem the New York legal system, which is one of the greatest legal systems in the world. And as these last few weeks have left many of us shocked as to what we saw in that courtroom. But that was not going to happen after the instructions were finalized. And I wrote a column after I saw the instructions saying it had the feel of a canned hunt, you know, where you can shoot game in a small space. The space was very small for the defense to maneuver, and even smaller, it seemed, for the jury to acquit. So I don't blame the jury at all. I think that what they heard in that room probably made it seem to many of them that this was a lead pipe cinch of a conviction. You know, they heard over and over again the prosecutors say that there were election violations committed by Donald Trump, that he ordered Cohen to commit the violations he pled guilty to. That totally smashed the instruction that Merchan had given. And Merchan just sat there. There was no response. So what do you think the jury's going to rule? And then when you tell them, just pick a crime among the three, you don't have to agree. Just pick one of these crimes. If you think that secondary crime was behind all of this, you're good to go. But to this day, most of us don't know what the jury decided, because we know that they unanimously voted to convict. We don't know what they convicted him of. They could have disagreed 4-4-4 on what occurred in this case. That's one of the first things that I think a court will look at for reversal.
Yeah, without a doubt, a huge constitutional issue. I would argue a Sixth Amendment one. You know, I want to play a moment that stood out to me in these remarks. You had Alvin Bragg yesterday saying that kind of the cornerstone, the focus of his office was white-collar crime. President Trump said Bragg's attention should be focused elsewhere. He said it just moments ago. Watch.
This type of white-collar prosecution is core to what we do at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. In the 1930s, District Attorney Thomas Dewey ushered in the era of the modern, independent professional prosecutor. For now nearly 90 years, dedicated professionals in this office have built upon that fine tradition.
We had a DA who was a failed DA. Crime is rampant in New York, violent crime. That's what he's really supposed to be looking at. Crime is rampant in New York. Yesterday in McDonald's, you had a man hitting him up with machetes, a machete. Whoever can imagine even a machete being wielded in a store, in a place where they're eating, and he's going rampant. And Bragg is down watching a trial on what they call crimes.
So there's a specific reason I wanted to play that, Harris. I, this morning, was at an event. It was a school event with my daughter. And another mom came up to me and said she was scrolling through the New York Times stories this morning. She saw one about the Trump verdict, of course. The next story was about a machete-wielding man. And she asked me why we aren't focusing on the latter. And Trump referenced that very story. And the reason I bring that up is I wonder if he's striking something in the heart of the American people when he says you should be focused on crime in the streets, illegal immigrants, all those issues, but instead you're focused on me.
Well, he doesn't have to strike it very hard because they're living through it. It's a Lake and Riley thing, a
Yes.
Riley-Laken thing, right?
Bingo.
So, you know, with that particular, and then we have the Jose Ibarra case that's going on right now. So, you know, we have a lot going on that this former president talks about on the regular. Even when he was coming in and out of the courtroom, we still weren't hearing about the border crisis and those illegal immigrants like that suspect Ibarra and others whose cases should be adjudicated. The people who, the illegal immigrants who flipped the bird to the cameras, as many of them were let go after allegedly beating the stuff out of NYPD cops. And I say allegedly because the law didn't even go after them, but there was plenty of video of it. So with all of that going on and with the former commander-in-chief willing to go there over and over, I would imagine it does feel like an honor for him to do what is necessary to take the country forward. I don't know if Biden feels honored to do that because he doesn't talk about it.
Yeah, it's a great point. And we do have that. I want to play it, Emily. I think viewers need to remember, you know, President Trump doesn't have to do this. Some argue this case wouldn't have been brought if he didn't do it, if he didn't put his name out to run another time. I don't know whether that's true or not, but listen to President Trump saying he's honored to wage this battle.
It's a very sad thing that's happening in our country. And it's a thing that I'm honored. In a way, I'm honored. It's not that it's pleasant. It's very bad for family. It's very bad for friends and businesses. But I'm honored to be involved in it because somebody has to do it, and I might as well keep going and be the one. But I'm very honored to be involved because we're fighting for our Constitution.
And with that, President Trump continues to underscore that he is a representative, a true representative of the people. We haven't seen anything like that out of the current administration that we are under. They seek instead to paint him as this beast. I appreciate your analogy so much. A canned hunt in a tiny space. And they have made him larger than life in the demonization of him. I note that the mainstream media chyrons, as he was speaking, says Trump's speech riddled with lies and attacks. No matter what he says and what he does, the left in this administration will continue to paint him as a villain, an undeniable villain with no good redeeming qualities. And here we have a quite human person that is saying, essentially, this is a terrible privilege that I'm honored to bear. And for every American that was watching that, they see in him what is happening all around, which is he being used as a tool for, to quote the Wall Street Journal editorial board, a destabilizing era. We have been ushered into a destabilizing era where lawfare against political opponents is somehow okay, where people fear for their safety every day, all day, and yet they see our tax dollars being squandered and stewarded toward white-collar crime that's the backbone of our society. They see to attack an innocent person just because he is fighting for those. As remember, those exit polls says back a long time ago, it feels like 100 years ago in those initial exit polls that said I voted for him because he fought for people like me.
Well, and on that note, you know, it was a little bit of vintage Trump. He talked about the issue that you could argue sprung-board him to the presidency in 2016. Here he is on the border.
Our borders are open. Our borders are going to be closed very soon. November 5th is going to be the most important day in the history of our country. Who on earth can want open borders where people are allowed to pour in from countries unknown, from places unknown, from languages that we haven't even heard of.
Kennedy, I mean, that's what took him to the White House last time.
Well, and the problem has gotten much worse since he first started talking about it in 2015. And right now we are in the sugar high, this liberal sugar high, in the wake of the verdict coming out yesterday. And people are going to get over that. That's going to fizzle. The news cycle is so chaotic and so quick that guess what they're going to focus on next? Not being able to afford food and housing, and, you know, certain communities having to compete with jobs with people who are here illegally, who are not only trying to work, there are people who are sucking out resources. And that is a very real thing that has allowed Donald Trump from this point to craft a new coalition. I actually thought his speech today was less disciplined than it should have been, because this is a moment, we're in a completely new phase of the campaign. And this is a moment where a lot of people who are on the fence are looking to him for his reaction. He has been so disciplined throughout the trial. I think he could have used more of that today. He was a little bit repetitive, went on longer than he should have, but he touched on some really key issues that have turned people who maybe couldn't stand his personality 4 years ago. Now they're very curious, because not only is he fighting for them, he's fighting against a machine that has put so many people in prison and so many people in jeopardy.
Kennedy, I think, you know, I want to play one of those moments of discipline. And this was much overlooked, Professor Turley. You know, you've been in the courtroom. You've been able to look Donald Trump in the eyes, or at least from the overflow room, see his reactions. I can't imagine what it's like to go through 5 weeks of this and then to hear you're guilty. Last week, he was at his rally. There were chants of lock her up. And I want you to listen to what he said in response to that. Let's play it.
I was very much responsible for the construction of the Jacob Javits Convention Center, where Hillary Clinton was going to have her big evening. That was not good. Remember? We had the glass ceiling.
Well, we didn't play it in full. If you go on to listen to his remarks, he goes on to explain, I didn't lock her up, because that would not be what's best for the country. I focused on the issues. I focused on you. He was magnanimous in that moment.
Yeah, it's part of the really disconnect when you hear Alvin Bragg referred to Thomas Dewey. Thomas Dewey ran against Truman. He didn't try to put him in jail. And
That's right.
with regard to, and you also have Hillary Clinton doing a victory lap. And, you know, Hillary Clinton not only had the email scandal, but one of the most glaring problems in this trial was that the judge allowed the prosecutors to say that media and political organizations don't, you know, spike stories, don't plant stories, as if that were a fact, which of course it's not. In that very election, the Clinton campaign killed plenty of stories and planted false stories. The jury was not given that information. And so this goes again to what the jury saw and what the rest of us saw. But I think that what we're going to see out of this, and this goes to what Kennedy said, is that, you know, you got the feeling in there that history is being made, but we don't know what history. Obviously, we have the conviction of a president, and that is history that we should all feel saddened by, regardless how you feel about Trump. There is a dehumanizing aspect that people on the other side no longer view this as a human being. And you saw that when I walked out of that courthouse and saw the celebration in the streets. But there's another history here. Not since John Adams have we seen the legal system used so politically as in this case. It's in our DNA as citizens that the legal system has to stand apart. Mm-hmm. And so you may see an interesting response from the American people that they may not like Donald Trump, many of them don't, but they're sure not going to like what they saw in Manhattan. And Manhattan is not the entirety of our legal system, and it's not the entire nation. I think that we're now going to see that reaction.
No doubt about it. Unprecedented trial, never before brought case as it pertains to a federal election with New York state law. But here we are.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.